You're not as in control as you think. Every day you make choices: what to wear, who to trust, when to speak. But what if I told you, most of those choices weren't yours to begin with? They were planted, nudged, shaped by forces you couldn't see. A flicker of tone in someone's voice, a slight shift in body language, a well-timed silence. Tiny psychological weapons used by people around you, sometimes without them even realizing. From your boss to your best friend, even your own family. And here's the disturbing part. This manipulation isn't loud. It's invisible, quiet. It wraps around your brain like a silk thread, comforting until it tightens. The science calls it covert influence. You experience it every day. In relationships, politics, marketing, even in love. It's how cults are built, how abusers stay undetected, and how powerful people bend the will of entire crowds with nothing but psychology. By the time you finish this video, you'll start noticing it everywhere. You'll start asking, how much of you is really you? The illusion of free will. You probably think you're in control of your life, that your decisions, big or small, are your own, that when you choose a product, walk away from a conversation, or even fall in love, it's because you wanted to. But here's a darker, more unsettling truth. Most of your decisions have been gently, almost invisibly, guided by others. It starts early. As children, we're programmed to follow cues, mimic behavior, and absorb emotional feedback. We learn to smile when someone smiles at us, to speak softly when a room goes quiet, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, our actions become less about conscious thought and more about fitting into a world filled with invisible rules. These rules aren't always written. They're sensed, internalized, reinforced by approval, fear, shame, or praise. Over time, what feels like our choice is often just the most socially acceptable option our brain has filtered through layers of invisible pressure. Take, for example, the concept of social proof, a psychological phenomenon where people conform to the behavior of others, assuming it's the correct course of action. You're at a party. Everyone's laughing at a joke you didn't find funny. Do you smile anyway? Probably. That microsecond hesitation between your true reaction and your chosen response? That's the influence working. Your brain is wired to prioritize belonging over authenticity, because, biologically, being part of a group meant survival. This isn't just social pressure. It's deeply coded into your neural architecture. One of the most powerful experiments to prove this came from Solomon Asch in the 1950s. In his infamous conformity experiment, participants were shown a series of lines and asked to match their length to a reference line. The answer was obvious. But when actors deliberately gave the wrong answer, the real participant often followed, choosing the obviously incorrect answer just to stay in line with the group. Nearly 75% of participants conformed at least once. Not because they didn't know the truth, but because they chose comfort over accuracy, group harmony over personal truth. And they didn't even realize it. And this isn't limited to small experiments. Think about advertising. Companies don't sell products, they sell identities. When you choose a certain brand of phone, it's not always because it has the best specs. It's because it feels right. Because their carefully crafted messaging tapped into a part of your psychology you weren't even aware was vulnerable. That moment when you say, "This brand just gets me," that's not insight. That's manipulation dressed up as resonance. Another layer of this illusion is the concept of priming. Imagine walking into a store with calming music playing, soft lighting, and a faint lavender scent. You're statistically more likely to make thoughtful, slower decisions. Now imagine harsh fluorescent lights, loud, fast-paced music, and a crowd. Your brain goes into urgency mode. Suddenly, you're making impulse purchases. Not because you're impulsive, but because your environment has primed your brain into a reactive state. This isn't hypothetical, it's been replicated in multiple psychological studies. Your surroundings can literally hijack your state of mind without your consent. And then there's language, the most subtle manipulator of all. The way questions are framed can radically alter how you respond. A classic study showed that people were more likely to agree with a surgery if told it had a 90 success rate than if told it had a 10 failure rate, even though both statements are logically identical. This is called the framing effect. Your brain doesn't operate purely on logic. It reacts to tone, context, and emotional weight. Politicians, marketers, cult leaders, they all understand this. They frame reality and you follow it. You might be thinking, sure, but I'd notice if someone was manipulating me. But that belief that you're too aware to be influenced is exactly what makes you more vulnerable. There's a psychological term for this, the bias blind spot. It means we believe we're less susceptible to bias than others. We trust our own perceptions, even when they're being warped right in front of us. Now consider this chilling detail. In abusive relationships, especially psychological or emotional abuse, victims often stay not because they don't see the harm, but because their sense of reality has been subtly rewritten. This process is known as gaslighting. The abuser twists facts, denies evidence, and reinterprets memories until the victim questions their own judgment. Over time, the victim no longer trusts their own thoughts. They become dependent on the abuser's version of reality. And yet, from the outside, they may look composed, in control, making their own choices. But the truth is, they're not. Their free will has been hijacked. This illusion of autonomy permeates our digital lives too. Every click, every scroll, every pause on a post is tracked. Algorithms learn what holds your attention and feed you more of it, not to inform you, but to influence you. Ever notice how your feed slowly nudges you into more extreme versions of your interests? That's not coincidence. It's behavioral engineering. You feel like you're exploring freely, but you're being guided subtly, strategically, and constantly. So, where does that leave you? If our choices are shaped by forces we barely notice, are we ever truly free? Or is free will just a comforting story we tell ourselves so we can sleep at night? Here's the unsettling truth. Free will exists, but it's fragile. It needs awareness to survive. It needs discomfort. It needs you to question not just what others say, but what you believe. Every time you feel certain, pause. Every time a choice feels too easy, look closer. That's where influence hides, in the unexamined moments, in the quiet assumptions, in the pause between your thought and your action. Because the moment you stop noticing is the moment someone else starts deciding for you. Weapons of silent control some people manipulate with loud words, aggressive stances, or obvious threats. But the most dangerous manipulators don't need to raise their voice. They don't push. They pull quietly, surgically, and with terrifying precision. Their tools aren't fists or commands. They're psychological, and they work best when you don't even notice they're being used. Let's start with gaslighting, one of the most effective weapons of control. It doesn't break your mind. It bends it slowly. Imagine someone rewriting your memory one sentence at a time. That never happened. You're imagining things. You're too sensitive. Over time, you stop trusting your own thoughts. You begin to rely on them for what's real. They become your filter. And that's the goal. Not to argue facts, but to take away your ability to believe yourself. In long-term gaslighting cases, victims often describe feeling like they've lost their mind. But it's not insanity, it's influence turned inwards. Then there's priming, a tool so subtle you'll swear it's not manipulation, until you see how it works. A classic study showed that people primed with words like elderly, gray, and wrinkle walked more slowly afterward, even though they weren't consciously aware of the connection. That's the power of priming. It sneaks into your unconscious and plants a seed. Influencers, politicians, even your coworkers can use priming to steer your reactions. They won't tell you what to think. They'll just build an environment that leads you there on your own. Another psychological lever? Reciprocity. Humans are wired to return favors, even ones we didn't ask for. That's why salespeople give you a free gift before pitching a product. Creates a subtle pressure. You feel the need to repay them. Not because you want to, but because your brain is following a social contract that's been there for thousands of years. Even cults use this. They'll shower new members with affection, food, validation. And once the person feels they owe the group something, obedience follows naturally. Let's not forget the foot in the door technique. It's a psychological Trojan horse. First, they ask for something small, something so minor it feels harmless.
A favor.
A task. A yes. But that first yes opens the door. It changes your self-image. I'm the kind of person who helps them. And once you accept that identity, it's much harder to say no the next time. They don't force you into big decisions. They build toward them step by step until you forget where you started. The darker cousin of this? The door-in-the-face technique. Ask for something outrageously large, something you'll almost certainly say no to. Then, after your refusal, ask for something smaller. Now, the smaller request feels reasonable in comparison, even if it isn't. Your brain, desperate to be fair, sees the manipulator as compromising. But in reality, you just got nudged. This isn't negotiation. It's psychological misdirection. There's also emotional anchoring, the act of tying a feeling to a person, object, or situation so strongly that the two become inseparable in your brain. Think about a toxic partner who gives you affection only after making you feel worthless. Over time, your brain wires together love and pain. It starts to expect hurt as a condition for connection. You don't stay because you enjoy the abuse. You stay because the abuser has become your emotional anchor. It's a survival loop your brain doesn't know how to break. Marketers use this too. That upbeat jingle? That warm-toned commercial? That carefully timed image of a laughing child as they show you a product? All of it is engineered to anchor a positive emotion to what they're selling. You're not buying a thing, you're chasing the feeling they taught you to associate with it. Then we have mirroring, the subtle imitation of another's speech, body language, or emotional tone. We do this unconsciously when we like someone. It's a natural bonding mechanism. But manipulators do it strategically. By reflecting your emotions and energy back at you, they create a fast, artificial sense of trust. You feel understood, connected. We're so alike, you might think. But that's the trap. They studied you, adapted to you, became what you needed them to be so you'd lower your defenses. And speaking of defenses, let's talk about isolation. One of the oldest, most brutal tools of control. You may not notice it at first. Partner who doesn't like your friends. A boss who insists on loyalty above all. A group that discourages outside opinions. Slowly, your world shrinks. Your feedback loop becomes smaller and smaller until only they remain. At that point, they don't even need to control you. Your environment does it for them. Many of these weapons rely on your natural psychological wiring. They don't need to overpower you, they just need to reroute what's already there. That's what makes them so effective. So undetectable. So terrifying. Because if someone can influence your emotions, your perceptions, and your behaviors without you noticing, then what part of your life hasn't been shaped by someone else? And before you answer, consider this final layer, authority bias. The tendency to trust figures of power, even when they're wrong. In one of the most disturbing psychological studies ever conducted, Stanley Milgram found that ordinary people were willing to administer what they thought were lethal electric shocks to others, just because a man in a lab coat told them to. Over 60 of participants obeyed, despite hearing fake screams of pain. They weren't evil. They were obedient, conditioned, influenced. Now think about your own life. Who have you trusted simply because of their title, their confidence, their calm voice? How many decisions have you made not because they felt right, but because someone made them seem right? This is the psychology of silent control. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It smiles. It wears a friendly face and waits for you to hand over your will. One small compromise at a time. By the end of this video, you won't just see manipulation. You'll feel it when it's happening. And that awareness is your first defense. Case studies of covert influence. It's one thing to understand manipulation in theory. It's another to see how it unfolds in real life. Quietly, deliberately, and sometimes fatally. When dark psychology is applied not in a lab, but in homes, offices, relationships, and cults, it doesn't feel like psychology anymore. It feels like betrayal, like madness, like waking up one day and realizing your life hasn't been yours for a very long time. Let's start with one of the most infamous examples of covert influence, Jim Jones and the Jonestown Massacre. In the 1970s, Jones led a religious movement called the People's Temple, built on promises of equality, love, and justice. He spoke with passion. He welcomed the poor. He cared for the sick. But beneath that surface, something far more sinister was happening. Jones used every psychological weapon in the manipulator's arsenal. He isolated his followers in a remote jungle in Guyana. He used sleep deprivation to wear them down. He regularly shifted the goalposts of truth, telling them what they saw and heard was wrong, replacing facts with fear. He created an atmosphere of constant paranoia, with fake enemies and staged threats to keep people dependent on him for safety. And when it came time to test loyalty, he did something chilling. He staged fake suicide drills called White Nights. Followers would drink what they were told was poison, just to prove their devotion. They were relieved to find out it wasn't real. Until one day it was. Over 900 people died. Mothers, children, grandparents, all following a man who never raised a weapon. He didn't need to. He had their minds. He was their reality. That's the devastating power of covert influence when taken to its extreme. People can be led not just to obedience, but to self-destruction willingly. But you don't need a jungle or a cult to see this kind of control. Sometimes it happens in quiet suburbs, behind closed doors, in toxic relationships that no one suspects. Take the case of Anna, a bright, confident woman who slowly became a shell of herself after entering a relationship with a man she thought was just intense. At first, he showered her with attention, texted constantly, complimented her intelligence, made her feel like the center of his universe. Then the shifts began. He started questioning her memory. "I didn't say that. You're imagining things." He'd isolate her from friends, making subtle comments like, "They don't really get you like I do." He'd oscillate between affection and coldness, making her desperate to win back the warm version of him. Over time, she stopped making decisions without his input. She second-guessed herself constantly. Her confidence was gone. From the outside, he seemed charming, supportive. But on the inside, he had slowly rewritten her self-image using nothing but words, attention, and emotional conditioning. Anna wasn't weak. She was psychologically captured. And like many in her position, she didn't realize what had happened until she left and looked back. This kind of influence is terrifying because it mimics love. It weaponizes closeness, and it uses you against yourself. Even in more public settings, covert influence thrives. Consider the story of Elizabeth Holmes, the founder of Theranos. Her biotech company promised revolutionary blood testing technology, and she used charm, confidence, and emotional manipulation to convince some of the world's most powerful people to believe in it. Military generals, politicians, business moguls. None of them asked too many questions. Her voice was deep, her gaze unshakable. She wore black turtlenecks like Steve Jobs. And most importantly, she sounded like she knew what she was doing. People were swayed not by data, but by presentation. Holmes mirrored the expectations of success so convincingly that it took years for anyone to realize the technology didn't work. The manipulation wasn't in what she said, but in how she made others feel important, included visionary. That's the thing about covert influence. It rarely feels like deception in the moment. It feels like trust, like loyalty, like going with your gut. But if your gut is being fed lies, who's really in control? One of the most deeply researched psychological experiments that mirrors this kind of everyday influence is the Stanford Prison Experiment. Conducted by Philip Zimbardo in 1971, it involved students randomly assigned to play either guards or prisoners in a simulated jail environment. No one was trained. No one was told to be cruel. But within days, the guards began abusing the prisoners. Humiliation, punishment, dehumanization, it all emerged without instruction. Why? Because the structure of the environment allowed it. The uniforms, the labels, the isolation, it all created a psychological permission slip to abandon empathy. The lesson wasn't just about the participants. It was about us. Put anyone in the right environment with the right psychological levers, and you don't need to teach cruelty. The situation will do the work. Even marketing plays with these dark tools. One case involved a fast food company that subtly adjusted the lighting and color scheme of its restaurants to make people eat faster. Why? Because faster turnover meant more money. The customers didn't realize it, but their behavior was being engineered by design. Every bright light, every hard plastic seat, every loud pop song. It was all part of a psychological plan. You might call it business, but it's also behavior control. Now consider social media. Influencers craft authentic personas. They mirror your insecurities, offer solutions, build parasocial relationships that make you feel seen. But many of them are trained in persuasion, branding, even neurolinguistic programming. They sell not just products, but versions of yourself you didn't know you wanted. Their captions, timing, filters, and music are optimized to trigger emotional responses. That's not a coincidence. That's manipulation at scale. And perhaps the most disturbing case of covert influence? The everyday person who uses it without even realizing. A parent who guilt-trips their child into obedience. A friend who weaponizes silence. A partner who manipulates by playing the victim. These aren't villains in the traditional sense. They're just people who've learned, consciously or not, that subtle control works. That you don't need to yell when you can whisper in just the right tone. What makes covert influence so powerful isn't just its effectiveness. It's its invisibility. You rarely see it when you're in it. It disguises itself as love, care, confidence, leadership. It rewards you just enough to keep you hooked, and punishes you just enough to keep you compliant. The scariest manipulator is not the one you recognize. It's the one who never raises suspicion, who makes you feel safe while pulling your strings. But now you've seen the patterns. You've read the stories, and slowly your brain is learning what to look for. The spell isn't fully broken, but the cracks are forming. Why you don't see it happening? You'd think that once you understand manipulation, you'd be able to spot it. You'd see the signs, hear the tones, feel the shifts in your gut, and call it out. But here's what makes covert influence so disturbing. Most people don't see it while it's happening. In fact, the more confident you are in your own perception, the more vulnerable you may be. Let's start with something your brain does constantly. Filling in gaps. Your mind is a prediction machine. It hates uncertainty. It rushes to complete stories, even when the facts are missing. This is how cognitive biases are born, mental shortcuts designed to simplify complex situations. Useful in survival? Absolutely. But manipulators? They weaponize those shortcuts against you. Take the truth bias. It's your default setting. Unless you have a reason to distrust someone, your brain assumes they're telling the truth. That's why lies, especially well-delivered ones, often go unnoticed. When someone looks you in the eye, speaks calmly, and uses confident language, your brain relaxes. This feels right, it whispers. But feeling right isn't the same as being right. It's just a reflex, a psychological trick based on pattern recognition, not logic. Then there's confirmation bias. You believe what fits your existing worldview and filter out what doesn't. A manipulator doesn't have to fight your beliefs. They just have to align their message with what you already suspect, want, or fear. That's why propaganda works so well. It doesn't teach you something new. It reinforces something you already wanted to believe. It feels empowering when in fact, it's narrowing your vision. Now add cognitive dissonance, that mental discomfort you feel when holding two conflicting thoughts. Your brain hates this, so it bends one belief to fit the other. That's why victims of manipulation often defend their abuser, rationalize toxic behavior, or even blame themselves. They didn't mean it. Maybe I misunderstood. It's my fault for pushing them. This isn't weakness. It's your brain trying to protect itself from breaking apart under emotional contradiction. But here's the kicker. Even when you sense something is off, your emotional brain often overrules your logical one. That's because humans are driven more by affect, emotion, than by data. If someone makes you feel good, makes you laugh, touches your insecurities in the right way, your brain lowers its guard. Manipulators know this. They don't argue facts. They create feelings. And feelings, once planted, are hard to dislodge. Let's talk about normalcy bias. In the early stages of manipulation, especially in relationships or workplaces, people tend to rationalize the behavior as normal. They're just having a bad day. That's just how they are. You minimize the red flags because accepting them as real means accepting that something in your life isn't safe. And safety, even if it's false, is a powerful illusion. This is why manipulation often feels invisible until it's too late. Not because the manipulator is some evil genius, but because your own brain is designed to trust, to bond, to avoid conflict, and to find stability. Your biology conspires with your emotions to protect you from discomfort, even if that discomfort holds the truth. There's also the sunk cost fallacy. The more time, energy, or love you invest in someone or something, the harder it becomes to walk away, even if it's clearly harmful. Manipulators exploit this by gradually escalating their control. Each compromise you make feels small in the moment. But over time, those small steps become chains. And by the time you realize how far you've strayed from yourself, you feel it's too late to leave. Now consider how language plays a role in this blindness. Manipulators often use vague, ambiguous phrases that are open to interpretation. You're just being emotional. I'm only saying this because I care. Don't take it the wrong way. These statements sound reasonable on the surface, but they blur boundaries. They leave you questioning your own reaction instead of the other person's intention. It's linguistic gaslighting, confusing your instincts until you become your own censor. And then there's empathy. Ironically, the more empathetic you are, the easier you are to manipulate. Why? Because manipulators thrive on emotional negotiation. They'll twist your kindness, use your guilt, cry at just the right moment. They don't need to win the argument. They just need to make you feel bad for setting boundaries. Your compassion becomes their tool. But the most dangerous reason we don't see manipulation is this: we don't want to. Admitting you've been controlled emotionally, psychologically, even subtly can feel like admitting weakness. Shame kicks in. Pride builds walls. You think, I'm smarter than that. I'd never let someone do that to me. But that's the trap. Influence works best on the intelligent, the caring, the socially tuned in. Because they respond to nuance. They care what others think. They read between the lines. And let's not forget social conditioning. We're taught from an early age to be polite, to not make scenes, to give people the benefit of the doubt. But manipulators weaponize these social norms. They rely on your silence, on your fear of overreacting, on your instinct to forgive. So they push, just enough. And when you don't push back, that's the green light. So what does this all mean? It means the human brain is designed to miss manipulation. Your mental shortcuts, so helpful in daily life, become liabilities in the hands of someone who knows how to exploit them. Your empathy, your logic, your social instincts, they can all be turned against you. And you won't feel it until you're deep inside the trap. But awareness is the crack in the armor. The moment you stop assuming your thoughts are completely your own, you begin to reclaim them. When you feel a sudden urge to please someone, or you second-guess your memory, or you justify someone else's bad behavior, pause. That's not just a feeling. That could be a signal. You don't have to live in paranoia, but you do need to live in consciousness. The truth is, manipulation isn't rare. It's everywhere. In marketing, in politics, in relationships, in leadership. And most of it is invisible until you put on the psychological lens and choose to see it. You can't stop people from trying to influence you, but you can start seeing the strings before they tighten. The ethics of influence so far, we've peeled back the layers of how people influence you, from subtle priming and manipulation to the dark mastery of fear, guilt, and social conformity. But now we arrive at a question most people avoid, perhaps because it's uncomfortable, or maybe because the answer reveals something about all of us. Is it ever ethical to influence someone without their consent? Let's not pretend the power of influence exists only in the hands of villains or shadowy puppet masters. You use it too. Every time you post something carefully worded on social media to trigger likes. Every time you adjust your tone to get what you want from a friend. Every time you downplay your needs to appear more agreeable in a relationship. That's influence. Micro-manipulations. Tiny, socially acceptable nudges. It doesn't feel dark when you do it, because you convince yourself it's harmless. You're not lying, you're being strategic. You're not controlling, you're setting boundaries. But these justifications highlight a difficult truth. Influence is a tool, and tools don't come with morality. People do. Psychologists have debated for decades whether manipulation is inherently unethical. Some argue that influence without awareness is a violation of autonomy, essentially stealing someone's ability to choose freely. Others suggest that because influence is baked into all social interaction, it's only unethical when it causes clear harm. That might sound reasonable, but it leaves a lot of gray area, especially when the harm is psychological, gradual, and invisible. Let's take a moment to revisit Milgram's obedience experiment, the one where participants were instructed to deliver electric shocks to strangers simply because an authority figure told them to. It wasn't just about obedience. It was about ethical blindness. The authority didn't scream or threaten. He simply used language, tone, and subtle pressure. The experiment requires that you continue. That was enough. It's easy to look at that and think, well, I wouldn't go that far. But how often do you comply with things that make you uncomfortable because someone in power nudged you into it? How many times has guilt or fear convinced you to stay silent instead of speaking up? Here's where it gets darker. The most skilled influencers don't need to silence you. They just make you think it was your idea. And that's what makes ethical questions so complicated. If someone chooses something freely, but only because they were psychologically engineered to feel like they wanted it, is it really their choice? Corporations use this logic every day. They study your attention span, your scrolling patterns, even your micro-expressions to craft ads that hit your emotional core before your brain can resist. Political campaigns use focus groups and subconscious priming to shape messages that bypass critical thinking. These aren't crimes, they're strategies. And they work. But what happens to a society when influence replaces consent? When choices are engineered rather than made? This question became especially real in the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where harvested Facebook data was used to build psychographic profiles and sway voters, not by convincing them, but by activating their deepest fears and biases. These people weren't lied to. They were played, nudged, steered, and many of them will never know. You might think, well, that's politics. That's big tech. I'm just a regular person. But even in personal relationships, the ethics of influence sneak in. Consider gaslighting, a manipulation technique where someone makes you question your own memory or perception. It's not always loud or aggressive. Sometimes, it's quiet, patient, and deliberate. Are you sure that's what I said? You're being too sensitive. You always overreact. The manipulator doesn't tell you what to think. They just plant doubt and let it grow. And again, the terrifying part is, it works best when it doesn't feel like manipulation. So where's the ethical line? Most psychologists agree on one basic principle. Manipulation becomes unethical when it undermines another person's ability to make an informed, voluntary decision, especially when it benefits the influencer at the expense of the other's well-being. But here's the trap. That sounds easy in theory, yet in real life it's all about shades of gray. Was that guilt trip your mom gave you manipulation or concern? Was your friend's silence emotional control or just emotional exhaustion? Was your partner's compliment a tactic or genuine affection? You can't always tell. And that's what makes dark psychology so potent. It operates in ambiguity. Still, there's a way out. The antidote to unethical influence is awareness. When you start to recognize these tactics, priming, gaslighting, love bombing, forced dichotomies, you begin to see the matrix. You pause. You question. You reclaim your agency. And on the flip side, when you find yourself using influence, because yes, you will check your intent. Are you empowering the other person or controlling them? Are you creating clarity or confusion? Are you helping them decide or making the decision feel inevitable? Because influence isn't going away. It's part of how we connect, persuade, and survive socially. But understanding its power, especially the dark parts, gives you something most people never have: the ability to defend yourself not just with logic, but with psychological armor. You've now seen how deep the rabbit hole goes. Influence isn't just about ads or arguments. It's about identity, memory, fear, and control. And the most dangerous influence isn't the one you see coming. It's the one that feels natural. So the next time you find yourself thinking, I want this, or I need to do this, ask yourself, who planted that thought? And if it wasn't truly yours to begin with, are you really in control?